David, thanks for being here. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for coming. This is my turf.
Well, I was going to ask. So I'm a little unclear. What part of Hollywood is this? Where are we? Yeah.
This is the Hollywood suburb known as Philadelphia.
Oh, that's right. I see.
And this is the theater that I did my first professional play in when I was 9 years old.
All My Sons?
All My Sons by Arthur Miller. You know, because these actors all have headshots, but I wasn't an actor yet, so we were just going through
just a kid
photos
at school.
of me. Yeah, it was just a photo we found. David Corenswet, Bert, is a fourth grader who is a big fan of the Marx Brothers, Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, Bill Irwin, and of course, Star Wars. He also loves building with Legos. All My Sons marks his first appearance on the legitimate stage, which is, I hadn't read that sentence.
Where
was
your illegitimate work?
Well, so that's a reference to Bill Irwin and his three-man show called The Regard of Flight, which is probably a pretty little-known show. But if Bill ever watches this, there's a VHS of this show he did in the 80s, I think on Broadway, that my dad saw in person, and then there was a VHS tape of it that he rented from the library every other weekend. So that was the movie that we watched the most growing up, and that's a very obscure reference to one of his lines in that show.
The legitimate stage.
The legitimate stage.
Bill Irwin, there's no bigger fan of silent comedy stars than Bill Irwin.
Yeah. And one of the few living sort of stewards of the tradition.
Yeah, getting Bill Irwin to talk about Harold Lloyd is a treat. We've had him on TCM talking about Harold Lloyd.
He came and taught a master class at Juilliard, and he taught a lot. But I remember him teaching us how to trip on stage, and that was pretty magical.
Bill Irwin taught you how to trip on stage. What's the key? Like toe? Like, do you remember?
I honestly don't remember. I did. It was sort of an experience of a magician coming and explaining a trick, and you going, "You do it better. I'll just watch you do it."
So you do it. Yeah. So there aren't a lot of kids 9 years old, 8, 9 years old, who it almost feels like Star Wars is thrown in as a perfunctory, "Hey, I'm a normal kid," right? But it starts with Marx Brothers and Fred and Ginger.
Yep. Yeah.
How did that happen?
I think it was just. We didn't have cable growing up, and television was not allowed or a part of our sort of daily routine. But we did watch a lot of movies growing up. We would rent movies at the video store down the street. From my mom would watch great films. I remember watching Indiana Jones over her shoulder for the first time when I was probably too young. And I remember watching Star Wars over her shoulder for the first time and getting to the scene where they've escaped the Death Star, and Leia says that was too easy, and she leaves, and Luke and Han discuss their sort of euphemistically their attraction to her. And I just remember thinking, this is boring. But obviously the rest of the movie was very exciting for a 7-year-old or however old I was. But on my dad's side, and my mom had great appreciation for this too, but it was a lot of movie musicals and black and white films, specifically the Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers movies. And the Marx Brothers movies, which were funny enough to be appreciable by a 6, 7-year-old.
Yeah, you crowd 38 people into a tiny stateroom, right?
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah,
that's just going to work.
But the great thing about the Marx Brothers, where I feel not to denigrate any other great comedic legends, but where the Three Stooges, I feel, sort of get left behind in your childhood to an extent. The Marx Brothers have that great thing of there's plenty of physical comedy for a kid, and then when you get older, as with great movies that you watch as a kid, you realize all of the dirty jokes you were missing as a kid, and all of the sophisticated turns of phrases and those things. So I think that's my dad liked the idea of that we could grow into the films.
So why did your parents ban television?
I think my dad would take credit for that. My mom was just generally a little more relaxed about stuff. About that kind of stuff.
Did they want you to read?
I mean, it wasn't, I think it was more the great films. I think they both were great, had great appreciation for great films, and just felt like maybe television could sort of in the way that it sometimes gets left on in the house. Also, it was the ads, I think, for my dad, the commercials. Anytime we were watching TV, if we were watching a sports game or something, he always insisted on muting the television when the commercials came on.
So, but what drew you to acting? Like, what was where did that?
Well, my dad was an actor for about 6 or 7 years.
On the stage, like locally?
On the stage in New York. He graduated from college, had been kind of miserable at school because he hadn't gotten to do a lot of acting, and moved to New York, and at some point got his equity card and did some equity shows. Nothing that I would say was sort of remarkable from a public point of view. I did some background work on some soap operas and some films. Eventually ended up going to law school, which was where he met my mom and where the next chapter of his life started.
So you could tell that was something that mattered to your dad growing up.
Yeah, it was part of his identity, I would say. And later, by the time my sister and I were born, he was just a great appreciator of theater. So we would go to see plays, and he was always the one laughing the loudest in the audience. He was one of those audience members where the people sitting around him got kind of frustrated, but the actors afterwards would come up and say, "Thank you for laughing."
Yeah. Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
So he sort of clearly instilled in you that this was something magical. I mean, you could tell, the impact it has on a kid to see the thing that makes their father really happy.
Yeah.
Right? Like even if you don't process that directly, that seeps into you.
Yeah, but I never worried. There was never a risk that I was going to do it to please him. It was just that his appreciation for it made me think, well, there must be something to appreciate there.
Yeah, no, I think that's what it is. I think, of course, it could be to please him, but you can tell, like, boy, this makes something tells a kid that this the thing that makes my dad happy.
There's got to be something to it.
I'm curious.
Yeah.
Yeah. And is there plenty of kids who are child actors? Most don't go on to have a career at it. So when did it start occurring to you that maybe this is what you wanted to do for a living?
Really not until I was at school. I was at Juilliard.
But if you go to Juilliard,
So I remember thinking when I was a senior in high school applying to schools, I had been doing theater. I'd been doing professional theater in Philadelphia for 7 years. I had done something like 8 shows extracurricularly, and then I'd been doing theater in high school. I did the great Upper Darby Summer Stage program, which is having its 50th anniversary this summer, which I'm missing to promote Superman. Unfortunately, I wish I could be there. But so every summer I did 2 or 3 musicals at this great program. But when it came time to apply to schools and you're sort of thinking of it as a career, I knew that you could apply for conservatories. And a lot of my friends were auditioning for musical theater programs, BFA programs. But still nobody could really describe to me what a career as an actor looked like.
Right.
So I applied to the University of Pennsylvania because I thought I'm not ready to commit to a path that I don't know what it looks like, and that field, more of the people I went to school with were applying to good schools and hoping to get in and sort of figure it out from there. And I happened to apply early decision, which meant that once I got in, even though I was planning to audition for Juilliard and NYU, and I did a play extracurricularly with a independent student group, and it occurred to me at that point that I was looking at it differently than anybody else in the play with me. Everybody was good and everybody liked doing it, but when it came time to putting in extra time or extra work to make the play even better, or to make something work that wasn't working, I got a lot of eye rolls and sort of like, come on, I need to get home. I need to get back to my dorm. I got homework to do. I want to wait, And I thought, oh, okay, this is what I want to spend my extra time
Something
on.
clicked. This was what was exciting.
Yeah, but it wasn't until when I was at Juilliard with these 17 other actors.
You transferred after your freshman year?
Yeah, I spent 1 year at Penn, and in my second semester I auditioned and got into Juilliard. And it was meeting the people at my audition days, the teachers and the other students, the prospective students, and then meeting the people who would become my classmates, where I thought these are the people who I should be spending 4 years with.
And so I'm all curious. I love actors. So are you thinking then, as you work your way in Juilliard and things are going well, you're meeting these people, are you thinking, I'm going to have this lovely career, hopefully on Broadway, some off Broadway, or do you think I'm going to make movies?
It's a good question. I made my first student film when I was the summer before I went to Juilliard. I had no concept of what making a film really meant. I made a couple commercials when I was a kid, but
You're adorable, by the way. So that's
thank
why-
you.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Well, but
Yeah.
also,
Just wanna get
turns
that out of
out,
the way. I like to tell people when they're adorable.
turns out,
Yeah.
I was also great with a teleprompter as 11 years old. So Juilliard is essentially 100% theater focused. All of the work you do in there is theater, and scene study is geared towards, you've got an audience there. I know they've adjusted that in recent years in order to reorient towards the changing landscape of where, where acting students can end up making a good living. But all the work that we did was theater related. I think as I got clearer while we were at school, and as I learned more about the illustrious alumni of the school and where they had gone off to do great things, I think movies did end up being sort of the ideal or the thing to be really sought after. Broadway was never a thing that meant something to me in the abstract. I love going to see Broadway shows, but when I think of Broadway, I usually think of musicals, and although I love musicals and have done musicals, I don't know whether I'm going to end up doing musical on Broadway. Those people really know what they're doing.
Yeah, I let you breeze past your that musical theater component.
Oh, yeah,
so
yeah, yeah.
So can you sing?
I can sing well enough. Yeah, I can carry a tune. I love music and I love singing. I have sort of an older school baritone voice, so a lot of the modern musicals I just can't sing high enough for. But give me a Music Man or a Guys and Dolls, and that I really love that stuff.
So does Superman do any singing?
Can't tell you because some people are only coming to the movie to find out whether I sing or not. It's a very small constituent, but it's important.
That's funny. Okay, so you succeed. We're going to jump forward a little bit here. Things.
I'm following you. I'm on your train.
Did you? Where'd you move when you left Philly? Then did you move to New York? Or did you move to LA?
So I moved to New York to go to school. So I was in New York for 4 years of school and then 2 years after school. We went to LA for a week for our 4th year showcase. So we got to do some scenes for LA agents and managers.
As a student.
As a student.
Yeah.
And I fell in love with LA to an extent. Your first LA sunset.
That's pretty great.
When you're a little jet lagged, and you just go like, well, of course they came here to make movies. It's the most romantic, and I remember cresting the ridge of the 405, and the San Fernando Valley splayed out in front of me, and the Indiana Jones theme started playing on my iPod, and I just thought, this is, of course, this is the place to make movies.
So you had the Indiana Jones theme on your iPod?
Yeah, it was back before Spotify, so it was just the playlist my iTunes playlist that I had put together. I was also behind the times, so probably other people had better setups, but the Indiana Jones theme, John Williams is sort of my musical. I was once asked in an interview if I had a superpower, what would it be? And it was to have John Williams music follow me around.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. And so in that instance, you want John Williams, scoring your experience. It's a lot more romantic and epic when you crest the 405 with John Williams playing.
What else? Can you think of any other John Williams scores that would have been on that iPod? Like, did you have?
I think that's the one that's now my alarm that I wake up to.
You wake up to the Indiana
So
Jones
there was that phase where it was very exciting that you could have a song be your alarm as opposed to a terrible bell or something.
It's still a little exciting.
Yeah, well, but the problem that I think people realized is that whatever song you have as your alarm, you end up hating.
Oh, right, sure,
And
right.
there's something about the dun 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 dun. It just never gets old. I've woken up to it every morning for the last probably 5 years, and I still love listening to it.
That's great. That's a great little bit. But you never lived in LA?
So 2 years in New York after graduating, and then I got my first job that was going to shoot in LA, which was Ryan Murphy's The Politician, and so summer of 2018, I moved out to LA to shoot that, and that gave me 6 months living in LA, which was amazing. I had a lot of free time. I wasn't in the show very much, so got to know, living in LA. And then the following fall, I started Hollywood, the next Ryan Murphy show that I worked on, and that also, luckily, shot in LA. So in conjunction with that, I moved out to LA, and I lived in LA for the next 5 years.
So you get into Ryan Murphy's universe, and you make a couple of pretty good streaming shows. I get it. You're not the the biggest part, but you got a role. Right?
Oh yeah.
You're part of this ensemble, and his ensembles are fun, I imagine. But being on a couple of pretty successful streaming shows, and
to be fair, those were the biggest things that had ever happened to me by a mile, and they were, Politician. River was originally a guest star contract, and after I got cast, just before I flew to LA, I was told that I was going to be up to a series regular contract, which just meant that I was going to be out there the whole time, and I was going to be sort of available as much as he wanted to write for me. That was as close to
and a lot more money.
This is true. Yes,
right. Like you can live as an actor all of a sudden.
Yes, which became actually the way that was most salient to me was right after I finished The Politician in December of 2018. The next 6 months, I was able to live at home in Philly with my dad as he was dying of cancer. So if I hadn't been up to a series regular, the choice to go home to Philadelphia and live with my dad full time and not be available to audition in New York and not be able to leave if I got a job, would have been a much bigger and more difficult choice for me and for my dad. One of the reasons that my dad was okay and happy to have me come and live with him was because he knew that I had just shot this series regular role, and that we knew that Hollywood, we didn't know it was Hollywood at that point, but we knew that next Ryan Murphy show was on the horizon. So,
and that you'd be in it.
Yeah.
So I have one of the great thrills of the job at TCM is how many people stop me to say that they spent the last 6 months, a year of their parents' lives, like with them watching these movies that their parents loved, and then they get emotional about it. And I feel like so blessed that I, in some way, involved something that matters to people. That must have been clearly you bringing it up. So that time mattered to you.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, I think. I was very close with my dad for most of my life. But I remember thinking at the time there probably aren't very many 25-year-olds who get to go and live with their dads for 6 months, and it was a lot of difficult things that go along with taking care of your father when he's dying and very sick. And but I think considering at least every father hopes that they go before their son, and so in some sense this is the best outcome that you could hope for. To get to spend that time with him and have the conversations that we had about life and death.
Conversations that you probably hadn't had and wouldn't have had otherwise, maybe.
Yeah, but not so much because he was dying, just because we were living together.
Yeah, right. No,
and when you just go over to your parents' house for dinner, you don't get that, that 10 p.m. to 1 a.m. where the talk just keeps going and everybody else is in bed, and we had a lot of those, and so we just got to subjects that you don't always get to. But yeah.
That's nice.
Yeah.
I'm glad you got that.
Yeah.
But being in these two streaming shows and parts in some significant movies like Twisters, right? This is that's making it as an actor, right? So well done. Except this Superman is, it's a different stratosphere.
Yeah.
And with that comes some significant pressure. What if I fail? Then I've failed very publicly and very spectacular.
Well, so the great thing about having gone to Juilliard is it's spelled out from day one. You are here to get good at failing.
Yeah.
And I had so many great intellectual conversations and arguments with my teachers about this because it's an interesting paradox. Because if you get good at failing, if you get comfortable at failing, then it no longer feels like failing.
It's just what happens.
Yeah. So there's this sort of, and as an actor, you don't want to as an actor in a scene, when you're doing your work, you don't want to lose that fear. You want to be afraid of failing, because it's only failing in a way that costs you something that's interesting to an audience, that does something to your scene partner, that does something to yourself. And I'm still chasing that. I love that feeling of when you're really scared of doing something in a scene, or you're really scared that your scene partner is going to do something in a scene, because that's where you get the cost of the drama, the cost to your character, the cost to your scene partner, the stakes.
The stakes, yeah.
But spending 4 years failing dramatically, and usually in your underwear, in front of 17 of your closest friends and the teachers who you admire the most and respect the most and want praise from the most in the world, that does sort of take the edge off of failure in the normal sense. I certainly don't want to be bad as an actor. I don't want to turn in a performance that people think is bad or dumb or silly or doesn't ring true. But I have good methods for bulwarking against that, or at least against my worry about that, which is basically that I make my commitment not to the audience, but to my director and to my scene partners and to the crew, the hundreds of people who are watching me work every day. And I commit that if they go home happy at the end of the day, and if they let me go home, if they say, all right, that's good, we got it,
right.
then I'm going to say I did my best. And if I ever feel like I haven't done my best, I'll always ask for another chance. I'll always ask for feedback. I'll ask for help from anybody. If my boom operator has an idea of how I could be better, I'll take it. Because all I can do really, all of my work happens there on set in front of these people. If they're happy, then at least, it's still possible that my performance could be, it's very possible, it's happened. But at least I can look back and honestly think there was nothing else I could have done. I really tried to do everything I could do.
But one of the scenes that I have seen is the full 10-minute
The interview scene.
argument.
Yeah,
the interview scene, right. But it's an interview scene between you and Rachel Brosnahan, Lois Lane, and you're, Clark Kent and Superman, sort of at the same time in this interview. And it turns into an argument, right? But it's quite something. And there's a moment that I don't think any of us have seen from any Superman where you get angry, and not in a brooding way, and not in a simmering anger way, in a yelling, "You're not paying attention to me," right? You say, "Yeah, people were going to die," and you're pissed. So, one, very comfortable for you, I think, right? An argument where it's leading somewhere. It's about something that matters, right? You're not just bickering, right?
Yep.
But we are getting a side of Superman that I don't think we've seen in the other actors who've played the part.
Well, the fun of Superman is, as with a lot of superheroes, but I think even more so with Superman, is the alter ego and the superhero are both sort of characters, where Superman is very presentationally powerful and calm and stoic and reassuring and friendly, and Clark is often a bit more intellectual and sometimes portrayed as bumbling or a little awkward or just nobody pays attention to him. He's just not remarkable. And one great thing that James was really focused on from the beginning was this third character, who we haven't figured out what to call him yet, whether it's Kal-El or Clark. But rather than thinking about one, either Superman or Clark Kent is the real one and the other is the alter ego, which you can go back and forth on, that there's a third, truer version of him, which is the version of him when he's with somebody who knows that he's both. So, and in our version, that's Ma and Pa Kent, who know that he's Superman and know that he's Clark and grew up with, he grew up with them. And Lois Lane, who knows that he's both of these characters, and she interacts with him as a journalist as Superman, and she interacts with him as a colleague as Clark Kent. And so she sees these characters, and she's one of the only people who gets to see him when he's not playing either character and he's a little bit of both. And so that scene, I think, is the crux of that character that we see. And the reality is that when he doesn't have to be Superman, when he doesn't have to be this calm, reassuring presence to the public, when he doesn't have to symbolize safety and security and truth and justice and all those good things, he still feels those values. But just like when a firefighter comes home, you know, or a paramedic comes home, they might get frustrated or they might panic about something, where in the course of doing their job, they would never let themselves panic or yell or raise their voice or, you know, convey that kind of instability or uncertainty. With Lois alone, even though they are technically recording, that's part of the scene, is that he keeps kind of forgetting that he's on the record at this point. It becomes just between him and Lois. You're able to see not his anger at Lois, but his frustration with the perspective that she's representing. And his passion about how certain he is that he's doing the right thing. Yeah,
it's interesting because in all the incarnations of Clark that I've seen, he's playing a character, right? But here, you get to see Clark with the full knowledge of this burden that he carries, right? And this privilege that.
Well, in that I think burden is the wrong word to describe. I think the great thing about Superman is that he never feels that his responsibility is a burden.
Responsibility is
it's his responsibility, and it is not a responsibility that has been thrust on him. It's not the Spider-Man with great power comes great responsibility, and it's not the Batman, you know, I have a responsibility to my city, you know, to clean up this scum. It's that Superman wants to help people, and so he feels a responsibility to follow through on that, because why wouldn't you? You want to do it.
So that gets into what can be a problem with Superman, you know, and it has been for me, but, you know, I'm not a huge comic book guy, but in the Superman movies, I always think, well, this is not interesting because these aren't real stakes.
Right.
You know, I mean, it's not just Superman, it's a problem with a lot of superhero movies, right?
But Superman is, I bet, traditionally there is that, you know, he's invincible and he has no internal struggle. So, like, what's the problem?
Yeah, right. So especially in this complicated world we live in, what place is there for a guy like that?
Well, Grant Morrison, who was the artist for All-Star Superman, which was a great Superman comic that I did not know of before this film, but was the one that James told me to go and read. There's a great interview with him talking about the inspiration for All-Star Superman, and he describes just this. People say, you know, if he can't be hurt, and if he doesn't have some traumatic past that he's trying to fight against, then what are the stakes? And his answer is all of the important ones. The fact that he can't save everybody, the fact that
people are going to die.
People are going to die, and they need to. I mean, it would be almost nonsensical to stop death. I mean, there would be all kinds of problems. That's not worth getting into. That's a whole philosophical thing. But yes, people are going to die. He has relationships with people that he wants to maintain, and being physically invincible and not being a dark and brooding, you know, Batman type doesn't mean you don't have interpersonal problems. You know, your girlfriend of 3 months says, "Yeah, I don't know if I still want to be with you. This is, you know, I'm not sure I'm feeling the same thing that I was feeling 3 months ago." Superman's got nothing. I mean, that's as big a problem. Those are the problems that we all deal with. Superman's not immune from that. In fact, that situation is heightened and made more dramatic by Superman's situation. And I think ultimately the thing that all of this does for the character is it elevates his one big problem, which is his isolation, which is that he is definitively different from everybody else on Earth. He is not human. He's an alien, and he has these powers that nobody else has. And he's sort of always had these powers that nobody else has. And at the same time, he wants desperately to be a part of humanity. So ultimately, the dramatic stakes of Superman as a character is that he is lonely and he doesn't want to be. And I think that is the most relatable and dramatic thing if anybody thinks about it for more than a minute.
I think James said that also. Didn't James say, Gabe, that he's like, yeah, my Superman's not immortal.
Well, so this is the other. I mean, I think that the central issue is that people care about the character stakes more than anything, I think, whether they admit it or not. Now, if you're going to have a great big action movie like this one, you don't want your character to be invincible, because that does sort of take the sting out of some of the action sequences. So the great thing is finding foes for Superman that can match him or can find his weaknesses, and finding those things in the canon of the comics. But also one thing that James and I found, I don't know whether we talked about this, but just because Superman can lift a building or can, lift a giant kaiju, doesn't mean it's easy. And just because you see I watched a lot of videos on bodybuilding and powerlifting when I was training, and you see a guy who can lift 1,000 pounds. Right. It's not easy.
Right, it hurt. Right, that's it.
And even when he's lifting 400 pounds, it's not like picking up a toothpick. It's difficult. He can do it, and he can do it for reps. He can do it way more than any normal human being can do. But you see the struggle. And I think the struggle is important for Superman, for our Superman, that you see how much it takes from him to do all of these amazing physical feats and to save these people and to be quick and to think quick. It's not easy. He can do it, but it's not easy. And I think as soon as you make it not easy, as soon as it costs him something to do, that's when it becomes dramatic and exciting.
One of the relatable things in this movie that you talked about Superman's loneliness is he does have a dog.
Yeah.
Right. And no man with a dog is truly lonely.
Although, when you get home and your dog has like ripped apart your briefcase and your work, and like and then is like sitting there, panting and wagging like, did I do good, Dad? There is sort of a even more lonely than lonely, which is like you're standing in front of the guy who's supposed to be your best friend. And you're just like, you don't even understand that you have ruined my evening.
All I want to do is lie down, man.
Yep.
I just want to lie down, and we're watching episode of The Pit. Can you just cut me a break, man? I have 3 dogs, and one of them, has basically ruined the last 6 years. So it's true, but I wouldn't,
But you wouldn't trade it, and that's the.
I might trade him.
Yeah, well,
I might trade that one. Yeah, but we're stuck with him. But the dog is nice. It does humanize. It's a way to humanize a character
I think
very effectively. Yeah.
James knows that, and especially for kids, I think like seeing a dog in a movie is very exciting, and especially a dog that's going to do what Crypto does, which is all the dog things, but then some pretty epic things as well.
All right, a couple big picture questions. James was eager almost to talk about, and now in 2025 is the right time to bring him back. Do you share those thoughts?
It feels like a movie that's gonna feel good to watch, and not in a cheap way, in that sort of way that we remember our favorite movies, and especially the movies that we go back and watch again and again. Apollo 13 is always one that comes back to me. I don't know whether you could say, well, Apollo 13, it's very timely now again because we're sending rockets into space and civilians are going to space, and that's not what makes it timely to me. What makes Apollo 13 or that's the one that's stuck in my head now. What makes that film and other great films that I go back and rewatch, Star Wars, timely to me, is the human story, the story of good people coming together to do their best, to overcome great obstacles and to protect each other and help each other, and in the end, triumph, even if it's only for a moment. I think you want to see good people doing their best triumph. And that ultimately is what Superman's about. That ultimately is what our movie is about one ultimately good person trying to do his best in a world where it's not so easy to just keep doing your best. The struggle of just waking up every day and continuing to put one foot in front of the other, keep doing your job, keep trying to do your best, keep trying to be a good person. And when you get to watch that for 2 hours and change, you leave the theater feeling like that was a good roller coaster to ride, and I wouldn't mind going back and riding it again.
At what point did the idea of playing Superman get into your head?
As a kernel that I thought would never, pop into a piece of popcorn? What's the metaphor there? It's like the smallest little scratching a while ago, probably 10 years ago.
Not as a kid?
Not as a kid. I grew up on the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies. Those were the superhero movies that I saw in theaters and that were really sort of relevant to me, just because of the timing of when they came out. And I think as a kid, I wouldn't describe myself as a kid who fit in that well, being a fan of the Marx Brothers. I had one very close friend who also was a fan of the Marx Brothers, and everybody else was kind of confused by me, I would say. There's something very romantic about the Peter Parker superhero story, which is that you're a nerd that gets bullied, and then you get these amazing powers, and you get to do cool things with them. And Superman, I think, is a different kind of superhero fantasy for a kid. So for me, it was that once I became an adult, a young adult, but I was in New York, and I was living with roommates and navigating New York. When I
trying to make it as an actor in some
capacity. And with my classmates, getting close with my classmates, I would always sort of be branded the dad of the group. I was the one who wanted to make sure that people weren't drinking too much and people were wearing their seatbelts, not in New York, but the people were taken care of and looked after, and I didn't feel the need to be cool. I'd given up on that. I always wanted to be cool as a kid, and then by the time I got into theater school, I had given up on that. And I went to school with some very cool people to whom I was happy to cede that status. But I focused on trying to be a voice of reason and safety and stability. I wanted to be somebody who people could come to if they had issues, and I didn't get involved in the drama of school for the most part.
When people had problems, they came to you, they talked to you.
I hoped that they would. And in moments they definitely did. But sometimes you don't go to dad with your problems, you go to your friends. And so sometimes I was the last person that people would come to. But that's also, I think,
that's a role.
It's a role, and it was a role I was very proud to be put in a couple of times with some close friends. I said I now have a 1.5-year-old kid. I've said I've been a dad for a long time. I've just been waiting for a kid to prove it.
Make it official.
But I remember one instance. I was living with my two other students, a classmate and another Juilliard student, and they were cooking in the kitchen and at like 11 p.m. because that's when you cook when you're at Juilliard, because you don't get home until 11 p.m. And the smoke alarm started going off, and I was in my room in my underwear, and as soon as the smoke alarm went off, I burst out of my room, grabbed a chair, stood on it, and pressed the silence button. And in that moment, they were panicking. They had no idea how to turn it off. This thing was filled with smoke, and so I ran out and got on the chair and pressed the hush button or whatever it is. And the classmate just sort of like looked at me. You come running out of your room in your underwear and you like save the day. You literally are Superman. And I remember her saying Superman in that moment, and thinking, that's so cool that me in my underwear turning a smoke alarm off at 11 p.m. is Superman. That's Superman energy. And I really liked that. And I think Superman as the dad figure is right in a way, where that thing of like, he's not the cool guy. He's not he's not necessarily the guy you look at and you think, I want to be that guy. You're like, I want to have that guy around. I want to hang out with my friends and get into trouble, and when things go bad, I want him to show up to save the day. So that was the first, but that didn't translate into me playing him on screen. I never thought it would be, I just thought it's too impossible to imagine.
But you liked that feeling?
I liked that feeling. I liked seeing that in her face, that in her face was relief and a feeling of like everything's taken care of with a glimmer of you look ridiculous. You're in your underwear. This is ridiculous.
Just to be clear, it was just your underwear. You weren't like wearing your underwear outside your jeans.
No, no, no.
Okay,
It was just the underwear. And I'm sure it wasn't red. But I also I have a pragmatic orientation towards life, and so even when I got the audition for James's Superman, and even when I did the audition, and when
the audition was on tape.
It was on tape to begin with. Yeah, I did it with my wife in our self-tape setup.
She read the lowest.
She read the lowest parts, and we watched the movies and sort of I talked a little bit about my thoughts about Superman. I wrote a little letter to James or whoever wanted to read it about my thoughts about the character, which I rarely do. And even when my wife said, "I think you might be the person to play this part," I just thought it just doesn't happen. It's just not going to happen. And not because I'm a pessimist, just because I'm a pragmatist. It's this amazing.
The odds are incredibly slim
and
at every point of this.
Yes, exactly. And surely, even though we're here and I'm auditioning, surely there's somebody who's going to be a better fit for this. It'd be too good to be true that James's idea of this character would be the same thing that I have to bring to the character. So it was really when. So I forgot about it, as you do most self-tapes as an actor. You put it on tape, you send it off, and then you forget about it.
It was that scene with it was the argument
It
scene.
was a shorter version of it that was that didn't have it was not the true circumstances of the film. It was adjusted to be a little more, leakable. It was if it got out, it wouldn't give anything away about the film. But it had that same tone and energy, and for James, I think he was looking specifically for the humor that was in the scene. And I immediately, when I read the scene, thought, this sounds like a scene from His Girl Friday, two reporters, working each other and getting around the question and making jokes. And,
definitely has that feel.
Yeah.
And she's very good at that too.
Yes, she's extremely good at that. So it wasn't until I was told that I was going to screen test for it. That was the first moment where I thought, oh, this could actually happen.
So James said on both occasions, like one, you sent in the tape, and he was like, "Oh, I think I have him."
Yeah.
He kept going, and there were like 3 or 4 people who definitely would have been good.
Great actors.
But as soon as I saw David, I thought, "Oh, this is it." And the same thing with Rachel, and then the same thing when he put you two together.
Yeah, which is crazy that we only read once together, and Rachel had slept about 3 hours the night before, and I had been working for 4 or 5 hours on the other stuff, doing stunt stuff, and
you already had it. You had the job.
No. We were paired up at that screen test. I think Rachel and I both thought, wait, that's it? We read the scene once. We're not going to do anything. Okay, then it must not have gone that well, or like I don't know.
Oh damn, these would have been great parts to get. Right,
But yeah, I guess it was just clear to James.
And having you, and I mean specifically having her a little, sleep deprived, like a reporter, right? That's like a.
James made the joke of it. We're going to have to keep you on little sleep for when we're shooting, because she does very good work on little sleep, which is a good skill to have. But she also does great work on a lot of sleep, it turns out. She's just damn good.
Given that you've had it somewhere in your head for a decade, that it'd be nice to play this character. What does the character mean to you?
Well, the way I hear that question is, what does the character mean to me in my life? And what it means to me in my life and as an actor is a role where I can honestly say, and I did ask myself this question, if this is the only role that I get to play for the rest of my life. And when I say the rest of my life, I don't mean that I'm playing it for the rest of my life. I'm saying I get to do this movie, maybe I get to do another movie, and then I don't get to play another role in my life. Would I do it? And the answer is yes. And I think I've probably stolen that from Christopher Reeve in one of the interviews that he gave. Because especially back then, there was a feeling of if you're going to play this guy, you might not get to play other parts because people aren't going to be able to see you as anything other than Superman. Where now I think people see it a little more as a launching pad for all sorts of other possibilities. But you have to, when you take a role that's going to be this visible and this iconic, even just visually iconic, and it's your face and the underwear, and I wanted to be prepared for the possibility that it wouldn't lead to a bunch of other things. That this would be the thing. And I felt really lucky that when I asked myself that question, the answer came back. Yep, somebody's got to play this part. And if you're the person to play it and you give up everything else to do it, it would be worth doing.
Because you mentioned him, the similarities between you and Christopher Reeve are hard to ignore. Juilliard, trained to be theater actors. He did it for some time before he got the job. Relatively unknown. You certainly had more screen success than he had. But young and fairly unknown Juilliard trained actors, both playing Superman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Both played the piano, both learned to fly planes, although I think he did both of those better than I did and more seriously than I did. Both had a kid sort of around the time of playing Superman, their first kid. I had my first, or my wife had our first, just as we were starting filming, and I think he had his first between the first and second, so both became fathers we watched this documentary, Superman, about him just before we started filming as a cast. We sat in the theater and watched it. And I resonated with his perspective on a lot of things as well, the way he thought about life and family and after the injury, how his perspective on life changed. I don't think there's any way or reason to try to sort of live up to Christopher Reeve. I think being the first big screen Superman, being such a successful one in every way, and having with his life set such an example in that Superman kind of way of persistence and goodwill and selflessness, and setting an example of everything's okay, reassurance and courage, even in the toughest of circumstances. I just feel grateful to get to play that character that he embodied and put into the public consciousness in such a positive and strong way. And I think every actor who gets to play Superman is playing the Superman from the comics, but is also playing the Superman of Christopher Reeve for that reason. So that is a reassuring feeling. There's no pressure or comparison in my mind. It's just a feeling of I've got that cape behind me as well.